Can you come down so we can see? Mr. President, should Americans be worried about nuclear war?
No.
That, ladies and gentlemen, was President Biden asked if the U.S. should be concerned about nuclear war because the Russian President Vladimir Putin has decided to raise Russia's alertness level in terms of nuclear capabilities and nuclear missile launches to the maximum. In other words, he is threatening the possibility of nuclear war. Welcome to this episode of Ignition Time, everyone. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is dominating the news globally, and it has reshifted the entire international geopolitical landscape. In fact, there were protests worldwide over the weekend, and here on your screen is a very interesting article from Berlin to Baghdad to Quito. Volodymyr Zelensky has become the face of Ukraine's defiant stand. This is someone who was a comedian 3 years ago. He had to put up with a lot of controversy surrounding former President Donald Trump, who, by the way, got impeached because of trying to interfere with Ukraine and trying to get them to dig up dirt on President Biden's son, Hunter Biden. The UN Security Council now has voted to convene an emergency meeting of the General Assembly over the Ukraine crisis. This is the 11th such session since 1950. Germany, as you can see on your screen, is dramatically ramping up its defense budget, while the European Union has actually shut down its airspace to Russian civilian flights and approved sending arms to the Ukrainians. Folks, what the United States was trying to do over the past 10 years, they've been able to do in less than a week because Russia and Russia's actions have mobilized NATO allies to come together. In fact, the United States is openly sending weapons to the Ukrainians, including Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. In fact, Russia now faces an unbelievable number of economic sanctions because the backlash over Russia's invasion of Ukraine is actually growing. Now, where this will all go, no one knows. And I can tell you that I do believe that we as Americans are going to feel the pain to some extent. I believe gas prices are going to go up. I believe inflation is going to get worse. In fact, speaking of things getting worse, things are already getting much worse for Russians. The ruble has collapsed, and the Bank of Russia has actually doubled interest rates overnight in order to try and keep money in Russia and prop up the strength of the ruble. The White House and European Union nations have actually joined to expel a number of Russian banks from the SWIFT financial transaction system, which, by the way, many European countries didn't want to do a week ago. In short, Russians are not going to be able to easily send and receive money using the SWIFT international banking system, which also means that Russian banks are not going to be able to make payments to American banks, specifically banks like Citibank, which are likely to suffer, and that is a whole different story. The United States and Western countries are also moving to restrict how Russia's central bank can use its foreign currency reserves. Over $600 billion in foreign currency reserves are held by Russian banks, and the Russian central bank is now not going to be able to use that money. That's basically like you having $600 billion of my money, and then I say, well, I'm not going to let you use it. It's as good as useless. Pretty incredible. Now, this, by the way, is going to make things very difficult for the Russian President Vladimir Putin, and there are rumors that he's already starting to get calls from his billionaire Russian friends who are saying, hey, I don't think war is a good idea, because I can tell you that guys like Putin, murderers like Putin, they don't care if their ordinary citizens suffer, but if their rich friends, those who own these big yachts, these oligarchs who have hundreds of billions of dollars, if they start calling Putin and saying, hey man, I'm getting poorer because of what you're doing, you need to back off, I think that is going to have an impact with dictators and murderers like Putin. Now, this crisis, by the way, will have a big impact on the world economy, especially oil and food prices. In fact, British oil company BP is actually exiting a big stake in Rosneft, which is a Russian oil company. Now, because of this overwhelming response from the United States and its allies, as well as a potentially humiliating military fiasco in Ukraine. Yes, you heard that right. You'll see that on your screen. A humiliating military fiasco in Ukraine. Putin actually ordered Russian nuclear forces on high alert. Now, this obviously has created concerns for America and other NATO members, but White House officials are at the moment downplaying all of this to justify their actions and saying, hey, Putin is in a corner. In fact, this is what White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said on MSNBC. This is exactly the kind of manufactured threats that President Putin has been using since the beginning of this crisis to justify further aggressive action. Basically, she's saying that he's trying to create trouble in order to justify his actions in Ukraine. And what she's saying is Vladimir Putin is saying, hey, we're trying to do this to defend ourselves, which, by the way, is the same nonsense that Fox News is also peddling. And this is what Jen Psaki said. What What is fact here is that Russia is under no threat from NATO, has never been, is under no threat from Ukraine, has never been. Now, on the flip side, Russian and Ukrainian delegations did meet for peace talks and nothing much came off it. They're actually going to meet again in a few days, and Zelensky from Ukraine has demanded an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal of Russian troops. So basically, I think Vladimir Putin is in a corner and he's trying to threaten nuclear confrontation just so that he can create a manufactured crisis to hide the fact that the whole thing is backfiring on the Russian economy. The whole thing is backfiring on Russia from a military standpoint. Russian troops and equipment, who by the way have been joined now by forces from Belarus, continue to pour into Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are defending Kiev and other cities tenaciously, but it's only a matter of time before they are overcome. Millions of Ukrainians could find themselves refugees because of the crisis, and this could become a huge humanitarian crisis. In fact, the worst humanitarian crisis that Europe has faced in decades. So now let's see what President Biden does next. In fact, I can tell you for sure that President Biden has done a good job of rallying Western support against the murderer Putin. Most of what lawmakers have been calling for, even before the start of the Russian invasion, more military aid for the Ukrainians, kicking Russian banks out of SWIFT, ending Nord Stream 2, reinforcing the eastern flank of NATO, is now being done. And much of the developed world, we're talking America, we're talking Europe, has shut Russian planes out of their airspace. The Russian stock market is actually closed because of the sanctions, and Republicans will not give Biden any credit for this. And so let's wait and see what actually happens. I can tell you that everything we are doing to try and hurt Russia is starting to work, and I'm hopeful that in the next few days Ukraine and Russia can come to some sort of an agreement. But I don't think the Russian forces will simply back off and retreat and go back to Moscow, because that would be a humiliating defeat for the murderer, for the dictator Putin, and I don't think he wants to be humiliated on the world stage, which is why he's talking about nuclear weapons to try and distract from the issue that this whole thing is significantly backfiring on him. Let me know what you think about this episode of Ignition Time in the comment section below. Please click like, please click subscribe, please enable notifications. I believe I've given you the most comprehensive update on the entire Russian and Ukrainian crisis. Let me know what you think. Please click like, please click subscribe, please enable notifications. I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.